Fantastic. Okay, so thanks everyone for joining again. This is another in our monthly webinar series, and today we're going to go over techniques for forecasting utilization and reporting, and really it's a focus on utilization equations in general. So a lot of the tips and the techniques about forecasting are really related to how you're doing your resource management and what does utilization mean to you. So we'll cover a couple of topics in this area, and with 30 minutes it's kind of hard to cover everything, so certainly welcome you to email us or ask us questions when I stop the recording in 30 minutes and have an open discussion. So if you haven't been to our webinars before, what I do is I have the phone lines on mute so I can get through the material, and this part of the session is being recorded because we do post these on our website and our YouTube channel. After the 30 minutes, I will stop the recording and open up the phone lines so that we can have an interactive discussion. Certainly, anyone who's participating in this webinar, I really encourage offering up ideas or suggestions, or just having it be like a nice little impromptu user group virtually with OpenAir users. So although we're talking about utilization today, I just want to let you know what's happening next. So the next webinar series, which will be the September series, we have one on the 13th and one on the 20th. The 13th, the focus on September is going to be subcontractor management. So we'll do a more general industry best practices session on September 13th, and then we'll do OpenAir techniques for subcontract management on September 20th. So hopefully you'll be able to join us for those. And just to let everyone know, if you've been to one of our OpenAir user groups in the past, I'm delighted to say we're going to start those back up again. We sort of slowed them down in 2018, but we decided we've gotten enough requests from you as loyal compatriots in the OpenAir community. We're going to go ahead and start those back up, and we're looking to potentially start in Atlanta and Chicago areas. So if you're interested in having a user group come by you, please feel free to email us at info@topstepconsulting.com and say, please come to my area, and we would love to entertain that. And then finally, in the fall, we'll wrap up our conference season with being a sponsor and a speaker at the TSW Las Vegas, Technology Services World Las Vegas event on October 15th to the 17th. So really 3 quick bullet items today that we'll cover, and we'll be heavily talking about utilization. I could talk about capacity and skill profile stuff in entire webinars by themselves. So we'll just touch on those as wrapper things, but we're really going to get into utilization today. And utilization is a measure that is quite often is a common measure in all professional services organizations, because it's really a measure of productivity and the investment of people as your asset in delivering the services that are bringing the income in and getting that return on investment. So you can see utilization in a variety of ways. But there's a basic equation, which is how much have you worked and how much time do you have available to work. And I'm saying it in that way because everyone will actually come up with a different equation on what those 2 values mean. And the good news is OpenAir can handle anyone's definition of utilization. If you find that you're struggling with one version in your system, please email us. I'd love to see. I like the challenge, right? The stump the chump situation, so I can see if I can give you some guidance on how to get the equations out. But really, utilization is at the numerator or the top of the equation is what are the hours that you're trying to measure with your percentage value. So billable utilization typically is billable hours, or productive or credited utilization might be things like you're giving people credit for doing pre-sales or mentoring of peers or things like that. So those are all ways to how do you understand from an actual or a forecast what hours you're trying to measure as being delivered. And the denominator is the base hours of availability. So in a typical work week in the U.S., people are expected to work 40 hours a week. So in most companies, or in many companies, 40 hours is the metric against what you're measured. So 30 hours of a 40-hour work week is 75%. But that denominator is something that's very variable in many companies, and we'll get into some of the differences that I've seen actually right away here in the denominator setup. So if you haven't run utilization reports in OpenAir, I really encourage you to, and especially if you're doing anything with timesheets. Utilization reports are a natural thing to do in the OpenAir system. And the utilization reports, if you start looking at it from a denominator perspective, OpenAir actually has standard utilization reports. You can find them under the Advanced Report tab called Historical Utilization for Actuals, or you can see Booked or Assigned Utilization for Forecast. If you use the User Summary report, so those of you who are using the standard report module, you'll see a tab called Summary, and in there you will see a user summary, and it has these denominator configurations inside the report. For those of you with the report management interface turned on, which is more the working session of the reporting, that would be under the cross-tabbed area. The account-wide user summary report has these denominator configurations. And this is a screenshot right from OpenAir, so I'm not making this up. So the denominator is something that you can configure as part of the report. Okay? And this has been around for a number of years. The denominator itself can be configured with this report to look at what's called work schedule or base work schedule hours. The work schedule hours are, the work schedule means the calendar, the working calendar, which is something that your administrators are setting up and maintaining in your account under the Administration Global Settings area. The difference between work schedule and base work schedule is that when you set up a work schedule or a calendar in OpenAir, it's recommended that you put your company holidays in there so that they can show up on your timesheet. And base work schedule means what are the hours that you have to work every week. I don't care what week it is. So for those of you in the U.S., July 4th week, base work schedule would be 40. Work schedule removes the holidays from that number. So work schedule is natively of value that for most companies is the available hours subtracting out the company holidays. So that same example for July 4th, the work schedule would typically be 32 if you get a day off for July 4th. Okay. So that's the really difference between those two, and those two are big distinguishing differences because that actually is a driver for how calculations can be unique for each of the geographies. Like in, you work 7.5-hour days in the UK, or you work 10-hour days over in Japan. You know, those are all different ways that the calculation can be suited to your region. Now, there's also other specific timesheet hours. You probably see that on the screen, use timesheet hours. So this is where I've seen a number of firms out there that basically want to also accommodate the fact that people are given vacation time or PTO, and they want to subtract that out also from the denominator. And so this report allows you to exclude those types of hours as well, so your holiday as well as your personal vacation. So that's all depending on the executive management needs of reporting. So that's one way to do the denominator, but this is using a standard reporting feature in OpenAir. The non-standard values, which it sounds very harsh, but actually this is a good 80% of customers that I work with, probably approaching more like 90%, are creating their own equations. They're not relying on a report because they really want a standalone reporting value that they can include on all kinds of different reports and mix and match so they can support graphs and dashboards and executive reports. So the first non-standard report that I have actually seen used, not very frequently, but it's available, and that is everyone's measured against the same static value. So maybe there's and this kind of derives out of companies who are just newly adopting OpenAir, and until they started using OpenAir, they would use like spreadsheets, and how the heck hard is it to figure out how many days are in a month on a spreadsheet when the months keep changing and the holidays keep changing. So for lack of, for ease of use, they'll decide, okay, everyone's measured against a 520 number for each quarter. 520 is the number, And it doesn't matter how many days are in a week, how many holidays we have in a quarter, how many of those, that kind of derives from those lack of tools approach, and you have to come up with something to save everyone's sanity. So OpenAir can accommodate that, and so if you're in that situation and you're a new user or adopter of OpenAir, you may want to consider initially starting up your utilization to use this. But because of the features of OpenAir, I wouldn't stay with this model. I would certainly move on to a more robust model where the system is smart enough to know how many holidays are over in Belgium versus the holidays in North America, for example. But you would set this up using a feature called Custom Calculations. In the Custom Calculations area, there's a tab called Custom Detail Fields, and it's really a place that you can define constants. And in order for this to work, you would define a constant. And so for this example I have on the screen, I would say a constant of a weekly target for everyone to be hitting is 32 hours a week. Everyone that's included in my utilization would hit 32 hours a week. The downside of doing this, other than the fact that you're sort of hard coding a number and not taking into account any exceptions, is that you are locked into doing reporting on a weekly period. This detailed custom value of 32 only makes sense in the context of a week. If I use this equation in an equation for a month, I would be 32 hours for the month, and that doesn't make any sense. So it's very limiting, but it is sort of an initial transition value that you can consider if you're new to the OpenAir environment. The one that is really used quite widely by everyone in the OpenAir community is custom calculations. And this is where you're defining your own value. What does my denominator of available values mean? So if work schedule or base work schedule are not granular enough, if you need to expand this out so that you're taking into account vacation and you want to remove that from your denominator, the custom calculation approach is the way to go, where you would define either the work schedule, the base work schedule, and then subtract additional hours out of that. I've certainly run into my fair share of customers who are looking to set the denominator as a representation of how many billable hours you should be working. That's slightly different than what a typical, in my opinion, a typical utilization metric is. Typical utilization metric is how many hours am I paying you for, and what percentage of those do I expect you to be billable. When you start messing around with the denominator, you're essentially wanting to set your equation up to say, I'm going to subtract out all types of values so that at the end of the day, the available values in my denominator should all be billable hours. That's what I typically see the driver is for this kind of calculation. So if I subtract out things like expected overhead and expected training time and expected vacation and expected non-productivity time or company meetings, if I subtract all that out and at the end of the day I get 12 as my available hours in a week, then I would expect all 12 of those hours to be billable, and that would drive like a target utilization of 100%. If you don't hit your 100% target utilization, which really means 12 hours of billable a day, then your management can see that. Now, flipping the script around and talking about the numerator, OpenAir from a standard value perspective also has a number of standard reporting values that already figure out what the numerator is, and you're simply adding filters into the report to say, okay, so the hours, the actual hours or the forecast hours that I'm going to consider are filtered by maybe a task type or maybe a type of project stage or maybe a type of user. And if you use the standard reporting values, which are shown here in one of the older UI screenshots, that reporting values are still very, very valuable, very accurate. They are available in the user summary reports only, and they provide the calculation already baked in. And inside the report, you identify what are the filters that make up the numbers for the numerator. And also, like I previously said, what is the denominator defined as. So this is all in report configuration. It is not a reporting value that you create. It's part of the report itself. Okay. One thing I do want to highlight is a booked with actuals or assigned with actuals. So that's a nice reporting value. If you're not aware of it, that reporting value will combine actuals up until the day you run the report. So actuals meaning from timesheets, and it will add in the booked hours from the day you run the report forward. So if I'm running the report today, I get time entries prior to August 16th, and then I get booked hours from August 16th forward, or assigned hours from August 16th forward. So it's a very nice, reporting value to use even outside of utilization. But the non-standard values are definitely where the bang for your buck's going to be, and this is where a lot of people, including TopStep, have created their own reporting values, because we want these reporting values to be on all different types of reports. The reporting values here start off with the custom calculations, and really what you're trying to do is you're trying to define, what does the term billable hours mean? What does the term productive hours mean? What does travel time mean? So you can create custom calculations that define the set of hours that you're looking for, and then you can combine that with your denominator that you've created, and now you have come up with your own utilization reporting metric. And in the example here, I have a billable hours value divided by my base work schedule hours, and the billable hours value is actually a custom calculation. A quite common way to identify that an hour is a certain category is the task type field that's available on the project task form. If you do not see task type, that means you're not using it. It doesn't mean that you can't turn it on, and it doesn't mean that your system is broken. What it means is that there's been a decision somewhere else in the system. You're probably tagging the information. Maybe you're putting the billable, non-billable, or admin or holiday on your timesheet directly through something called a time type. That is also a very good way to tag the information from the hours, like putting the hours in different categories. The big difference between task type inside the task and time type on the timesheet is who has the decision-making power to say that something is billable or not. If you put it on the timesheet, you are empowering your individual consultant to determine whether it's billable or not. If you put it on the task, you are empowering the project manager or the project administrator to identify whether something is billable or not, and it's not necessarily visible by the consultant. So that's kind of a general description of what would be a driver to pick one of those two. But it could be any number of things. It could be type of project. It could be project stage. And so you would use this as a filter when you're creating custom calculations in OpenAir. So now we have the numerator, and now we have the denominator, and now we can use an equation to create your percentage. So I get a percentage that spits out that says 86. That's great. What a great number. But that number doesn't mean anything if it's taken out of context. And so there's another feature that you can consider using, and it's used one of two ways typically, and that's called the target. So somebody runs a report and they see 86, and they're like, great, I hit 86. But if their target is 100, then they've missed the mark. But if their target is 75, then they've exceeded the mark. So it puts it in context if you enable and use this target utilization feature. It's an additional feature that's found in the optional features area of OpenAir. It's on the global settings page of the administration module. When you turn this on, you basically just tell each person in their user account what is their target utilization percentage and what date does that become effective. And that gives you reporting values called target hours and base target hours. By using these target hours, you can then divide them by your availability denominator, and you can come up with, well, you can also have your percentage, your target utilization percentage, and then you can have your target hours and base target hours. So you can compare your custom calculations of billable utilization or billable hours to target utilization and target hours, and now you have a context of what does an 86 mean? Is 86 good or is 86 bad? And that way you have an ability to set up self-utilization dashboards. And if you don't have those in your system, they're very easy to set up. There's a nice little trick on how you can set up a single report, share it with everyone, and whoever runs that report or looks at that dashboard, it automatically filters on just them. And that's something called the report filter set. So a self-utilization dashboard, definitely a useful tool so that people get more value out of their personal experience and understanding where they're at. if utilization is a metric or a goal that everyone has in the company. Okay. Now, putting it all together, here's some variations of what you can do with deciding how you want to track your numerator, how do you want to tag your hours, how do you want to track your denominator, what does the denominator mean, and perhaps the target utilization to put it all in context, right? So by doing this, I can actually have, these are all from an OpenAir system. The employee percentage breakdown chart at the top shows me percentage of time being spent by a team or by a person based on different categories, and that's all configured in your system. So how do I know something's admin versus marketing versus mentoring? I personally know this is from a system where their task type was being used. So there's a bunch of internal projects that have certain task types, and then there's a whole bunch of client projects that have billable, non-billable, and that's it. But that translates into something here where, just quickly looking at this, the good news is the billable utilization bar is the highest, which you would want in a professional services company. But the admin bar is also a little bit higher than I would want in an organization. So I would want to investigate to see where's all that admin time coming from, who's doing it, is there some enhancement or process streamlining that I could do to reduce that administration time. Okay. The second one on the left-hand side is a trending example. So people have been using your system ideally for a number of weeks, months, or years, and there's time in the system, lots of time in the system. And as long as you define your equations, there's nothing stopping you from running a trending or a historical report. And in this example, this is the last 12 months, and it's showing what the achievement of utilization is. So that's a slightly different definition than what my billable utilization is. If my utilization target is 75% and I come in at 75%, I have achieved my target 100%. And so this chart was specifically written so that I am looking at that 100 line. And my goal is to have all of my trending be at 100 or above, because that means on average the organization is coming in at target. And target tends to drive things like my budgeting process. How much should I be paying people? How much should I be billing customers so that I can get my return on investment and be profitable and hit my goals? So this chart takes, how do you get achievement? Achievement is what did I get as far as utilization, my 86%, and then divide it by the target, 75%. So in that situation, I would be over 100% achieved. Okay, so you just take those pieces and you take it one more step to get the achievement. And that's something at an executive level, a quick glance to see any kind of peaks or valleys that go above or below the 100, that's going to be of interest to you, and you don't have to scan hours and hours of reports or lots and lots of rows of data. You're just looking at this chart. And then finally, an individual view. So if you have teams or individuals within a team where you're kind of monitoring utilization, you can have a dashboard that shows monthly, weekly, quarterly. Where are my heavy hitters? Where are the people coming in that are less than ideal, that I need to focus on them and see why aren't the hours coming in? Are we not scheduling them? Do we not have enough work? Are we scheduling one person too much and not delegating to other people? So this by itself, although it's very factual, does give you answers to questions, or gives you, I guess, questions to ask so that you can investigate the data. Okay. Now what's interesting is now we put our hat on for capacity and staffing needs. The capacity, a capacity number, some companies count that as revenue capacity, like how much money could I deliver with the team that I have. But that still is based on an hours capacity, meaning how many hours can I get out of this person that would be considered billable or productive that would result in me earning money. So capacity in hours tends to be related to target utilization. So now we're back to using that target utilization feature and the combination of that with the work schedule to say, you know, if you should be hitting 75% of your 40-hour work week being billable, that means I have 30 hours of capacity to deliver. And that in itself is something you can set up in OpenAir, and it would give you a capacity hours number. You filter in a bill rate, now you have a capacity revenue number. And all you need to do is roll all that up into a nice graph or report so that you can say, how many hours do I expect to be able to earn or deliver as a company? And those hours are just as valid from a work schedule perspective, from a capacity perspective, as they are when they're dealing with the forecast of utilization and the actual utilization. So OpenAir itself can give you capacity because it knows all of the people on your team. And if you're trying to understand your staffing needs, you can use generics because generics also have a schedule, and generics can also represent capacity, and generics can be identified because they're generics to say, I have 10 people on staff, I can deliver this much capacity, but if I add 3 more people, here's how much more capacity I could get. So here's my wedge. Here's my capacity hiring need in order for me to hit numbers. And last is the profile and skills. So as I'm talking about capacity and utilization, that's very much a person focus. But people are all different varieties, and some individuals, you may need certain types of individuals because of the type of job they do or the type of skill set they have. So a common thing is, how many project managers do I need? That would be something I would consider a profile or a skill or a job type or a category. And those are all things that you can tag on individuals and then factor that into some of your equations or your reports. So you're grouping the information by the type of person. So not only are you doing capacity by people, you're doing capacity and skills by type of person. So now that breaks it down into one more lower level of detail. And I would say that one of the best areas to do this in is the entity tag feature. If you're not using it, it's an optional feature to turn on. And the entity tag itself gives you date index values that you can use both in resource searching in the resource module, but it's also very effective in creating custom calculations and report filtering. So the entity tag feature is used quite often to control whether you get included or excluded in utilization metrics, but it also is a good one to track things like department or job category or role or key skill. So the utilization calculations, and this is just touching the tip of the iceberg, but the utilization options that are available to you are really sort of sky is the limit type thing. So it's very configurable, very flexible. The key is understanding how you're tagging the data and what metric you're trying to measure against. What do you want the reports and the dashboards to communicate to you? How will they help you in your decision making going forward? Capacity planning is realistic in OpenAir. You can actually do it, provided that you actually have users in the system and you have a plan to layer in generics potentially for staffing needs. And the whole reporting, with the dashboards are one of those nice snapshot looking things so that you can interpret information very quickly without having to spend a lot of hours digging through numbers on a report. Right. So that concludes the material that we're going to cover. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop the recording